Did King David actually exist? For centuries, that wasn't even a question. But as modern archaeology evolved, a massive debate absolutely erupted. Was this legendary giant slayer and unifier of Israel a real historical monarch? Or was he just a brilliant piece of ancient fiction? Because, get this, in the early 1990s, the academic tide had heavily turned against the biblical account. Back in 1992, scholar Philip R. Davies famously claimed that King David is about as historical as King Arthur. He, along with a bunch of others, basically argued that David was entirely legendary, a pure myth who never actually existed. So welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to bypass the theology and look strictly at the dirt, the stones, and the inscriptions. Let's dig in and see what modern archaeology actually tells us in this historical detective investigation. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the myth versus historical reality, the House of David, capturing the neutral capital, unearthing David's Jerusalem, expanding the regional kingdom, and finally, the overall archaeological verdict. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Myth or Historical Reality. To really grasp this debate, we have to understand what's called the minimalist view. This was the scholarly belief, held by academics like Davies, that early biblical figures completely lacked any contemporary historical evidence, making them entirely legendary. Basically, because there were literally zero texts outside the Bible mentioning David at the time, the minimalist consensus was that this great king was just a fabricated origin story. But the dirt of the ancient Near East has a funny way of upending academic consensus. Which brings us to Section 2, the House of David. Now, what is so fascinating here is the sheer speed at which history was rewritten. I mean, it's wild. In 1992, Davies publishes his book stating David is a complete myth. Literally, the very next year, in 1993, an archaeological team makes a staggering discovery at Tel Dan. And shortly after that, 2 other ancient inscriptions are reassessed, completely collapsing that whole minimalist viewpoint in the span of just a few years. So what did they find? Well, here is the smoking gun, the Tel Dan stele. It's a carved stone pillar discovered in 1993, found built right into an ancient wall. And the kicker? The text is an Israelite, it's Aramaean, written roughly a century after David's life. And right there in the text is the phrase Beit David, the House of David, its contemporary, non-Israelite verification of a Davidic dynasty. An absolute game changer. And the crazy part is, this wasn't an isolated find. While the Arameans recorded the House of David, a Moabite stone known as the Mesha stele noted the Heights of David, and Egyptian records at Karnak Temple identified the Highland of David. Think about that. That's 3 entirely separate empires, all acknowledging his historical footprint. Moving right along to Section 3, capturing the neutral capital. With David's existence verified by those surrounding empires, let's look at his tactical genius. How did he actually unite a fractured group of tribes? Well, it all started with capturing the right capital. Before David, the landscape was highly contested. Overlooking the valley was an early Israelite settlement called Gilo. It was protected, sure, but it totally lacked a water source. Conversely, you had the Canaanite city of Jebus, or Jerusalem. It was off the main roads, but it possessed the absolute lifeline of the ancient world, the Gihon Spring. I mean, Gilo couldn't exist as a populated center without water, while a water-rich site right next door sat empty. Jerusalem was clearly an established stronghold. Picture that Jebusite stronghold when David and his general Joab attacked it. The steep valleys provided amazing natural defense, but that northern edge was the vulnerable entry point. David successfully conquered this fortress of Zion, making it his own. But you have to ask, why here? Why choose this somewhat off-the-beaten-path fortress? Well, this reveals the pure political genius of David. By bypassing established Israelite cities to capture a foreign enclave, it instantly became his direct royal property. Because it sat directly on the neutral border of Judah and Benjamin, no single tribe could claim it. It was kind of like an ancient equivalent of Washington, D.C. This was absolutely vital for uniting the kingdom under one administration. Plus, of course, it had that incredibly secure water source, the Gihon Spring. Let's move to Section 4, Unearthing David's Jerusalem. So what happens when we put shovels into the dirt of David's Jerusalem? Well, excavating there is incredibly difficult, mostly because of thousands of years of continuous, overlapping construction. It's like a giant puzzle. But in 2005, archaeologist Eilat Mazar made a massive breakthrough in the city of David. She unearthed the immensely thick walls of a monumental building dating right to the end of the Iron I or early Iron II period. Based on the biblical data, coupled with the sheer scale and location of these ruins, she believed she had uncovered the actual foundation walls of King David's palace. And the discoveries extend deep into the bedrock, too. Back in 1914, these gallery-style tunnels were excavated beneath the city. Now, while they're heavily debated, they perfectly mimic royal tombs found in other regions, and their location matches the biblical descriptions of the tombs of the kings. Even though they were robbed in antiquity, there's a really strong case that these are the remnants of the Davidic dynasty's royal tombs. Next up is Section 5, Expanding the Regional Kingdom. So we've got the capital, the palace, and the dynasty. But David wasn't just some local chieftain. He expanded Israel into a powerful regional kingdom. How is that even possible? Well, David's rise wasn't just about military skill. It was a matter of impeccable timing. The 10th century BCE presented a massive geopolitical power vacuum. With the Egyptian empire in decline, Mesopotamian powers weakened, Assyrian influence retreating, and Babylonian power diminishing, there was no reigning superpower to dictate terms. This golden opportunity allowed unified Israelite kingdom to rapidly expand its borders and influence. But you don't build a kingdom on timing alone. This expansion was built on complex administration and powerful economics. We see this in things like the clay shrines excavated at Kerbet Kaifa, a fortified site proving Judah had advanced administration way beyond Jerusalem. Pair that with the massive, organized copper mining operations at Slaves Hill in Timnah, and you've got a highly organized industrial engine driving the wealth of a complex regional state. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the archaeological verdict. We've reviewed the inscriptions, the strategy, the capital walls, and the economic footprint. And the verdict? That minimalist view from the early 1990s, the one claiming David was nothing more than a myth, it has been thoroughly dismantled by the spade of the archaeologist. The modern dirt, the stones, and the inscriptions, from the Tel Dan stele to the monumental walls in Jerusalem, to the massive mining operations down south, have permanently transitioned David from a legendary figure to a verified historical monarch commanding a complex regional kingdom. Which leaves us with this final thought. Archaeology is a highly dynamic, ongoing science. We've found the inscriptions and the foundation walls, but Jerusalem is a city built upon thousands of years of layered history. With the precise layout of royal tombs and palaces still heavily debated among scholars, it really makes you wonder, what else is waiting to be unearthed deep within the bedrock of Jerusalem? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the ground beneath your feet.